Hello. During the interviews, I wanted to learn how to become a better interviewer. I also wanted to learn more about the IT world in general, and that is why I chose two vastly different, in my mind at least, IT jobs, one dealing with healthcare and then another one being dealing with school. What I ended up learning was that each job is vastly different, and both of them actually have overlapping skills that are required for each. For instance, the schools deals with more device care and device type because each student I found out needs a device that they were sending home with them, at least for the Reardon School District. And so in doing so, there's a lot of care and repair and off-site networking that they needed to attend to and take care of, while, in the healthcare profession, there I found out was going to be more of a wireless aspect to it because doctors are always on the move. And in doing so, they needed to be unplugged so they're able to get up and go from room to room or patient to patient or wherever they had to go. They were always able to be fluid and move that way. Overall, I would say that everything that I learned I was impressed with. I was very happy with each of my interviewers. They were very knowledgeable, they were very nice, and they, treated with me respect, and I also hope that I treated them with the utmost respect as well. I was not disappointed with anything that I learned. Both my interviewees, like I said, Matt and Jason, are incredibly smart. They were devoted 100% of their time to their jobs and doing whatever tasks they were assigned to do. One thing that I was actually surprised to find out, though, was that many places are actually adopting going wireless overall and getting away from being wired, which is, I think, in my mind, a good thing, but also does come with some cybersecurity vulnerability. So I was just kind of surprised to learn that because each of them similarly said kind of the same thing on that. Something that surprised me during my interviews was how my first interviewee, Matt, was a very talkative interviewee. He was happy to tell me stories and give lots of examples. Jason, my other interviewee, did the same, but I had to ask a lot more questions and kind of try to pull some of that information out. He wasn't quite as forthcoming as Matt was. I was pleasantly surprised to find out that Matt did that because it helped me learn more about what I needed to learn or what questions I was kind of getting at without actually having to ask him directly. He just kind of, I'd say something or ask him a question, and then he'd just kind of go off and give examples and tell stories. And to me, that kind of helped me out because I was able to ask more in-depth questions at that point to him, and it just made me a little bit less nervous because he kind of not took over the interview, he sort of went through and just did his best to explain everything in a way that I could understand, and I really appreciated that he did that. I could interject, some questions every now and then to keep the conversation rolling or drive it in a different direction, and it definitely worked in that case. Another thing that surprised me was the fact that after my interview with Jason was that he actually offered for me to use him as a future resource, and that is not something that I expected to happen whatsoever. He told me that he was happy to hear about my goals. That was one of the questions that he asked me. He asked if I ever needed any help or any advice, that he was just an email, or he actually gave me his number just a call away, and he'd respond as best and as quickly as he could. That's something that I'm actually very grateful for, and I never expected to happen. But after meeting him, and we talked for almost an hour, I felt like I got to know him quite a bit better, and I'm very glad that that was something that he offered to me. Something that I learned about interviewing was that it is 100% not scripted. You can make an outline, you can prep, you can do everything you can possibly do, but in the end, it's very hard to stick to that script, so to speak. You just can't do it. So I definitely believe it's more of a guideline just to help you along. And, I made my outlines. I had all my information prepped up, ready to go. I was, best as I could be ready. But in both my interviews, I would start by asking a few questions pretty early on. And once we got started on a conversation or kind of went down the rabbit hole, so to speak, I was more invested in that conversation and learning about that specific skill or that specific task or project that they were working on. And my questions, I kind of went off focus of my paper and more focused onto what kind of popped into my head that was more related to what we were talking about. And I personally liked doing that because rather than using like pre-selected questions, those were able to help keep the conversation moving, but they wouldn't get me that juicy information that I learned by kind of going off script or off my outline and asking that directly. Another thing that I learned was to schedule interviews pretty well in advance. Both my scheduling times to interview with Matt and Jason were quite difficult. And that was because they're both very busy people, and especially with COVID going on, I found out there is just so much happening in their worlds. Matt said he was salaried and that he works about an average to 9 hour days, give or take, but then he also does some work at home. And then Jason told me that he was working about 9.5 to 10.5 hour days based off all the projects and all the things they had going on. And one of the projects he told me that they did was mobile tent setup for COVID testing. You know, that's a big undertaking, a big task, and he was part of the teardown setup. He was part of the project that built the IT infrastructure of those devices outside so they could be connected, and all of that was just incredible to me. But it made scheduling my interviews with him hard, and same with same with Matt. Both of them were difficult to schedule with, and finally we did end up landing on, there was a weekend that we had talked about, we set about a week or two ahead. We were able to set some time aside. They were able to set an hour aside for me and do this interview, and I'm very, very, very grateful for that. So I think that, one, thanking them is very important because they had no obligation to do it. There's no reward for them. All they're doing is helping me with the school project. You know, they don't know me. There's no, like I said, there's no reward for them. There's no obligation to have to do this. So I'm very grateful that they were able to do that with me and do that for me. And so I think that thanking them and taking scheduling into future consideration is definitely a helpful task and skill to have when doing interviews in the future. Another thing is that I believe I need to slow down. I felt that sometimes my interviews were rushed because I was talking too fast. And I also want to improve on not using vocal fillers like and I've become very conscious of that due to our book and some of the assignments we've done. So I've been working on that, as well as transitioning from one subject to another, making sure that's a little bit smoother. And overall, I think that being able to plan and conduct interviews has taught me a lot about myself as an interviewer, and this class overall has helped me learn some new skills in communication that I can ultimately use and utilize in the real world to help me further my own career and my life goals. So, for that, I would like to say thank you to all of my classmates this quarter and to my professor, and I will see you again in the spring for CMST 430 Organizational Communication. Thank you so much.